All right, guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about what makes March good. Also, we're just going to go over some reports from this last KVK. On the screen here, it's part of something it's called a report manager by Cubus Mics. Put a link in the description. And we're actually going to go over some artifact marches that I made. So if you don't know what an artifact is, for certain KVKs, you're allowed to put, it's a legendary accessory that's specific to that KVK. And then when you put the accessory on the secondary commander, it'll convert it from one troop type to another. So let's actually get into this. So we'll go over some components that I think that makes some March good. Quickly go over what the report manager looks like. I'll go over the baseline March I'm going to use to compare the artifact marches to. The ZL Hermit, in my opinion, is probably the second best March in the game. The best March is actually some combination. I actually think now that it's Luce Alex. I've used them all KVK. It's ridiculous. And I use Scipio Luce all last KVK. Having used both of them, if you gave me the option to pick one, I would pick Luce Alex. But regardless, it's going to be some March with Luce. And I think the second best March is going to be ZL Herman. And then in this KVK, I actually used 3 different artifact marches: Joan YSG, Scipio William, and Scipio YSG. So with the reports manager, we could put up like concrete data to compare. Now, obviously, there's going to be holes in there. Are you using your best equipment versus the second best equipment? When did you get your reports, right? Not all of our opponents were the same power level. Some were stronger than others. So there's other factors as well, right? But it's so cool to look at. So we'll get into this. So first is a variety of factors that makes a March good, right? What's the damage factor? So when you look at the active skill, there's like a number. About 400 damage factor is the white number you see on the screen, right? So for example, if something has a 4,000 damage factor, it should be about 10x what the white number on the screen you see is. So that obviously makes a huge difference in how the March does, right? The stats obviously contribute to all aspects, whether it's defensive or offensive. You have more attack, the white number, the damage factor is going to go up, and obviously defense and health, right? There's tankiness, so beyond the stats, there's ways to mitigate, say, like skill damage or normal damage, which is also smite damage. There's factors where it might not just show up in the stats, but there's things that like Hermit, right? If your opponent is poisoned, they deal less damage to you. So there's tankiness beyond the stats. March speed, it plays an offensive and defensive role. If you're very fast, you can actually connect to a target and deal damage and move and catch a target that's out of position a lot easier, right? And then on the defensive side, if you're out of position and you're slow, you're dead, right? You're not going to be able to get away. And when you're out of position, doesn't matter how tanky you are, if 5, 6, 7, 10 marches are hitting you at the same time, you're going to go down really quickly. So March speed is important. Not even so much on the top end where like you're super fast, but you have to at least be fast enough to be able to do stuff offensively and defensively. So it's more like the minimum threshold for March speed that matters a lot. Buffs, right? Buffs to your murder ball, to your teammates, and then debuffing the opponent's very important. That's not necessarily going to show up on the reports and where you can like put a number, right? Okay, like this debuff caused this many extra 7 wounds, but it's a huge part of what makes a March good. Almost like the part that's underappreciated. Or else if you're just looking at reports, right? 7 wounds, how you're trading. There's a reason why people aren't using Attila Takeda anymore. And I made this argument over and over again with Huoki Bean too. His reports look good, but because he has no buff and debuff, I think there's other commanders that might not do as much damage that are actually providing more overall. That's kind of the argument there. Something that's very important is skill and smite damage increase or normal damage increase, right? So like YSG has a 50% skill damage increase. I'll show in the reports here where maybe on paper it seems like the March shouldn't be that good, but because of this monster skill damage increase, it covers up a lot and it makes damage factors that might not be that impressive all of a sudden deal a lot of damage overall. Another thing that I think is very underrated in this game is instant proc. So Alex has an instant proc, right? So that means you don't have to launch an active skill to launch an instant proc. Depending on which commander you're talking about, in general, it's like, hey, 10% chance on a basic attack to do an instant proc. So Alex is like 1700. So on any one turn, when you deal a basic attack, you could do an instant proc for 1700 damage factor. And when you're getting cheeseburger, when you're cheeseburgering someone, when you're doing a murder ball fight, when you're connecting really quick and disconnecting, so you won't get a chance to launch an active skill, but instant proc could go off. It's very, very powerful. And then finally, there's like synergy, right? So I didn't actually get to use this March in the game, but something that Lord Addy Chetsky in our kingdom was very hyped about was, what if you use Joan and Ashurbanipal, right? So Joan's a cav march, Ashurbanipal is an archer march. But if you look at Ashurbanipal's expertise, every time an active skill launches, you get a big debuff to the march, right? But Joan procs a lot of active skills, right? She, like every other turn, she should be able to proc active skill twice. And just because you have one of Ashurbanipal's buffs active doesn't mean you can't actually trigger another one. So that's like a cool way to actually take two commanders, put them together to really take advantage of a certain mechanic of a commander, right? Another one could be potentially Herald, who is way out of the meta and shouldn't be used now with Ashurbanipal, because every time he triggers his Stamford Bridge, like he throws another hammer or axe, whatever that thing is, you could actually proc that buff again. So there's actually cool things to think about to bring commanders that are out of the meta back into meta with a synergy. So this here is just like a sample of what Cuba's Mike's report manager looks like. So on the left, you can see all the different commander pairings that I pulled up with this. On the right, you can see the kills ratio, right? A lot of this I was using, say, all T4, maybe half T4, half T5. So like it'll actually give you the 7 ratio of that. But then a probably more telling stat is the power ratio, right? So how much KP did you gain? How much KP did you give the opponent? And then that ratio, you could kind of get a good idea how your march did, regardless of whether it's T4 or T5. And then obviously there's a lot more of the stats in between. So again, I'll have this link, the link to his Discord in my descriptions. And I think the way he's setting it up right now, it's free to use it for 2 weeks. Takes a little bit to set it up, but once you follow the instructions, it's fairly easy. And then if you do want to use it, I think he's charging $50 per year, but it's on his Discord. So let's actually get into what I think is the second best march in the game, Zugalian Herman, or ZL Herman, right? So for this KVK, the kills ratio, so the 7 to 7, I traded 1.68 to 1, but then the KP ratio was 2.06 to 1, right? So the average reports, I used it quite a bit, right? So out of 2,331 reports, on average, I took 2,881 sev wounds and I dealt 4,775 sev wounds. You can see the equipment and the armaments on the right. I wouldn't say it's elite, right? But it's pretty good. There's obviously people with way better, and there's a lot more people with way worse, right? If I had to rate this damage factor, I would give this march a 9. Tankiness, I would actually give it a 5, right? They don't necessarily have a lot of stats. They have a decent amount of stats. But both ZL and Herman actually have ways to mitigate all damage as part of their kit, right? This march is on the slower side, which is why I give it a 4. And then the buff, debuff, really for this march, this debuff, I will give it a 10. It's one of the most utility marches as far as debuffs goes out there. And then as far as a skill or smite damage increase, I think both Herman and ZL have I want to say it's 20% each, and it comes out to 40% total, right? So like YSG by themselves get 50%, but 40% skill damage increase is really, really good. So I would give it an 8, but this is kind of like the baseline, right? So if you had to remember one thing, think KP ratio 2.06 to 1, and then the average report, it was like 2,800 to 47, about 4,800 as far as sev wounds, right? So let's actually go over some artifact marches. The first one I actually tried, I used this pretty extensively, was Joan YSG. I could just tell you right now, this march did better than Nevsky Joan when I tried it. And it's actually a very fun march to use, right? So the kill ratio for this is 1.86 to 1. KP ratio is 2.33 to 1. Both of those are better than the ZL Herman, which, like I said again, I consider to be the second best march in the game. I think part of the reason why this one does so well is because Joan has that, again, that double active skill, right? Now you pair it with another AoE commander that boosts the skill damage by 50%. It's pumping out a lot of damage. And also because It's a cav, and Joan does have a decent amount of march speed. It's fast enough to not get in trouble. And even though, you know, it's theoretically, if people saw Joan on the screen, they should just be targeting her. Out of all the reports, this one actually took the least amount of sev wounds on average, only 2,058, right? So you can see it traded really, really well. And I would actually say out of all the cav marches I did use, right, I used Joan YSG, I used Nevsky Joan, I used Nevsky William. I tried, let's see, did I try something? Oh, well, I used Mina William, which didn't do as well. But this one is actually really, really good. And just a quick thought, like YSG in general, I think YSG, kind of like Alex, in my opinion, is making a comeback, and I'll go over that later, just because Joan YSG did really well, Scipio YSG did really well, and I actually ran Herman YSG this KVK, and I was actually very happy with the results. All right, so if I had to give this march a rating for the damage factor, 8 out of 10, right? YSG is on the lower side now, even though it's a 5-target AoE, it's, you know, not what it once was. 1700 is not 2000, right? Or like Lucia like 2250. There is some stats on Joan. There's some health stats, and then YSG with the museum also has some defensive stats, but this is still a squishier march. I'll give it a 4 out of 10, just because it's cav, and then obviously there's some march speed with Joan. March speed 8 out of 10. Joan has some buffs for the murder ball. Like, I mean, you get some extra rage gain and some extra bonus damage dealt. So 5 out of 10, right? Could be worse, could be better. And then the skill damage increase is really, really high because of YSG, 9 out of 10. Overall, this march is really good. If you ever get to an artifact KVK and you somehow needed to squeeze out another cav march or up, like, this is more than viable. It's the best cav march I use this KVK. Now, something I did try was Scipio and William, right? And the thought process there was William has an instant proc, Scipio has an instant proc. So when you have 2 marches of instant proc and double AoE, it should do pretty well. Where I think this march really, really fell short is, besides a 10% skill damage increase from Scipio, you really don't get much, right? So this one, you can see the kills ratio is way lower. It's slightly above 1 to 1, like 1.11 to 1. The KP ratio is 1.36 to 1. I only got to use this for 230 reports, right? So not as big of a sample size, but 230 is, in my opinion, significant enough. And you can see it barely traded positive. And then those are the ratings I had of, you know, damage factor, tankiness, all that stuff down there. But I think where this march probably really fell short was it didn't have enough skill damage increase, right? Yeah, you can imagine if it wasn't a 10% skill damage increase, but a 50% like YSG, I think this march would actually end up doing really well. But it was cool to try it out just to see how that did. And also the equipment here was actually my second best infantry set. My best infantry set is actually on my Lucia, which I ran with Alex the whole time. But that's not really an excuse because I use the same equipment with YSG, right? So Scipio YSG, and you can see the kills ratio Scipio William is 1.11 to 1. With YSG, it went over 3 to 1. Now the sample size is very small. I only got to use this for 44 reports on the very last day, right? So to be determined, but the initial results are really promising. Now I had the idea to use this march because this is a while ago now, maybe close to a year ago. I remember another content creator, right, 12-inch. He, well, I think he just didn't have the commanders at the time, but he was talking about how he used Scipio YSG without the artifact, and it actually got him a massive amount of kills that did really well. I'm like, well, if he could do well without the artifacts, what if I just tried putting an artifact and converting all of YSG's archer stats to infantry? It should do better, right? And it actually, out of all the reports for any commander I use, this is a small sample size, it actually by far did the best. Okay, so you can see the sev wounds it dealt, 9,860. That's more than double any other march I showed as far as this video. And then, you know, like you see the rating down there, but YSG has a 50% skill damage increase, and then Scipio has, I think, 10%. So in total, that's 6%. That's on the very, very high side. You could, I guess, squeeze out more if you wanted to run like Herman with YSG, which is a really good march. But besides that march, there's not another one off the top of my head I can think of that has AoE and that has more skill damage. Okay, so this is, I would say, to be determined. The initial results based on a small sample size is really good. But obviously, you know, if I had 2,000 reports, I can say it with a lot more confidence. And finally, just for comparison, you can see all 4 marches on the screen, right? Again, Scipio YSG, even with my second best infantry set, so the worst equipment, actually, at least based on the reports, did the best, right? Now, obviously, it doesn't have as much utility as, say, William, but Scipio actually offers, I would say, a above average amount of utility, right? He provides shields, he has a healthy buff, he actually does a lot, and this is how everything compared. If you guys do like this, maybe I can make another video which showed all my marches that I used, especially the main ones, right? Like I use ZL Boudica, Herman YSGs for my 2 archer marches. I'm actually really happy with how they ended up performing. When I went to 7 marches, I did Nevsky Joan, Mina William for my 2 cab marches. And then for my 2 infantry, I did Luce Alex and then Kuang Scipio when I ran it. And obviously I had a siege march. So if you guys like this or you're interested in QS Mike's report, leave a comment, check out his Discord channel. It's a really, really cool thing, man. And people can say like, oh, this march is good, this march is good. Well, you can actually pull like thousands of reports compiled together and then show the data. I think it makes it a lot more substantial. So if you watch all the way to the end, you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to the video. It actually really, really helps out, especially the likes even more than the subs. But, you know, if you want to sub, really appreciate it. Again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.